McGraw-Hill Audio presents The Leadership Lessons of the Navy SEALs, battle-tested strategies for creating successful organizations and inspiring extraordinary results, by Jeff Cannon and Lieutenant Commander John Cannon. Read by Michael Prichard. Preface. The Quiet Professionals. Who are the SEALs? Not too long ago, a group of SEALs boarded a vessel that was racing for Iranian waters. The SEALs had watched the vessel for some time. The vessel's lights had been extinguished, and it was traveling late at night at the edge of the shipping lane. It rode low in the water, and its hatches had been welded shut. Barbed wire wound around its deck, and its windows had been boarded up, except for small slits to allow the crew to navigate. Whatever was in its hull would eventually help pay for several ex-Soviet ballistic physicists, surface-to-air guidance systems, and new microbe incubation chambers. The SEALs moved quietly along the main deck, around funnels and hoisting cranes, until they approached the pilot house. One hatch on the pilot house had not been welded shut, but it had been bolted on the inside. The SEALs surveyed the structure and then announced to whoever was inside that they were on board. They demanded that the hatch be opened. They were ignored. There was an outside chance that these were innocent civilian merchants. If they had not been, the SEALs would have blown through the walls immediately. Instead, they kept their weapons pointed toward the structure while they unpacked their manual cutting devices. The crew inside could be heard chattering nervously, but they still refused to open the door. In a few moments, their protests were irrelevant. They were in restraints. Their master was being questioned. The vessel had been stopped just short of Iranian waters. Soon its contents would be offloaded, and the hull would be auctioned off in Mombasa or Dubai. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, the second SEAL in charge of the group that had boarded the vessel sat and nursed his beer in a nondescript bar in San Diego. The platoon commander finished mowing his lawn. Later he played soccer with his kids and cooked dinner on the barbecue for his wife. The platoon chief worked in his garage on his 1972 Vega. The petty officers studied for college degrees, practiced with their bands, worked out, or went surfing. If you saw any of them that night or the next morning, you wouldn't know who they were or what they had done. Professionalism has been a SEAL theme since the first two SEAL teams were formed in 1962. That was when President Kennedy recognized the need for commando shock troops that could counter the growing number of insurrections, guerrilla movements, and terrorist organizations in the world. Today there are 8 SEAL teams, 4 on each coast. There are also 4 special boat detachments that control the fast boats that insert and extract SEALs along coasts and waterways. Despite their Navy lineage, SEALs are as proficient on land as they are in water and in the air, something that is frequently overlooked. They parachute and conduct ambush and sniper operations. They train as heavily in land navigation and land warfare as they do in water operations. In fact, the only real difference between taking down a beach house and taking down an inland house is that SEALs have more options for approaching the beach house because they can also use dive gear or boats. The actions at the target are the same, and taking down either type of house doesn't approach the complexities and hurdles of taking down a moving cruise ship or container vessel at sea. SEALs train continuously and hard. The initial SEAL training at Basic Underwater Demolition School, BUDS or BUDS, is 6 months long and routinely stresses its students to such a degree that there is an 80% dropout rate. Following BUDS, students attend courses in parachuting, mini-submarine operations, sniping, communications, demolitions, field medicine, languages, and a wide range of other areas. By the time they enter a SEAL team and are selected for a SEAL platoon, they will have received their masters in unconventional commando warfare. In addition, SEALs are usually well educated on their own. In John's last platoon, more than half the enlisted men had university degrees, and this is not unusual. Many go on to become officers themselves. All this helps enable SEAL platoons to adopt sophisticated organizational systems and conduct complicated multi-phased operations. Officers, meanwhile, often have graduate degrees and have received advanced language training. If they do eventually decide to leave active duty, they generally have little trouble being accepted into top law, medical, or business schools. Once a SEAL platoon is formed up, its members usually train together for an additional 18 months, with a heavy emphasis on small unit tactics and mission planning. The SEAL platoon becomes their family. Decades later, retired SEALs still look back and recall their platoon days as the period of greatest bonding, loyalty, and teamwork in their lives. SEALs have a wide range of missions, but each emphasizes technical expertise, organizational integrity, strong but customized leadership, and superb physical conditioning. Loyalty is king. Inherent in the SEAL mission is the capability to cause overwhelming devastation, as well as the ability to move and withdraw clandestinely. SEALs could go into a bar and destroy the place. In the field, they could lay down a swath of fire similar to the output of a military unit many times larger if they were to contact an enemy. But in both cases, if they do so, they risk negating their mission. If they destroy anything but their target, everyone else knows and comes running. And then their mission is compromised. The perfect SEAL mission is overwhelming gunfire or a precise explosion suddenly shattering the quiet of a dark night, with no one knowing afterward who did it or how they came and left. SEALs are the descendants of the underwater demolitions experts and Navy raiders who crept ashore to sever telephone cables and train lines in World War II, or swam into the shallows off Normandy and Okinawa to clear out mines and anti-landing craft traps. In Vietnam, they melted in and out of the jungle, riverbanks, and rice paddies, earning the name Men with Green Faces from the Vietnamese. In Grenada and Panama and Bosnia and Somalia and Afghanistan, they were quietly among the first to arrive in the country. They are among the most highly decorated military units in existence, despite their small numbers. Every day for the last few decades, in fact, they have been operating somewhere around the world, avoiding the media and accomplishing their missions. Today, SEALs continue to incorporate leadership and team-building techniques that strongly emphasize effective communications, intense loyalty, quality work, strong culture, and innovation. SEAL methodology is used as the basis for executive leadership and corporate team-building programs. SEAL philosophies and values provide the foundation for continually achieving ambitious objectives. Introduction. As you listen to this sentence, there are squads of Navy SEALs operating somewhere in the world. They are working 100-hour weeks, often under intense pressure. They are probably cold and wet. They can't always call home to their families. They don't have access to 401k plans. They don't have reserved parking spaces or company cars. And sometimes they die. Despite these hardships, they feel personally bound to their peers, their boss, and their mission. They are committed to their organization. They are skilled enough to be trusted with undertakings that affect national policy. They are bright, educated, and ambitious, and they could have chosen any other career path. But they didn't. Instead, they fought for their positions. They volunteered for their assignments. And they are working for a lot less than you're currently paying your employees. How can a 7-man SEAL squad accomplish a mission that affects national policy, while your 17-person sales team can't produce a working quarterly sales plan? It's simple. SEAL platoons employ proven leadership tactics and team models aimed at making effective decisions and conducting successful operations. Business teams frequently concentrate on retaining short-term employee goodwill and building universal consensus. The Navy SEAL organization excels at creating small, skilled, loyal teams that are specifically designed to complete ambitious projects successfully. Business teams are often ad hoc outfits whose design and membership may not be the best for reaching their goals. SEAL teams are the result of decades of experimentation, dozens of conflicts, and continuous reinvention. Business teams are frequently organized with little actual knowledge of what worked before. SEAL squads are filled with enthusiastic, capable team members who have been carefully screened for their job. Business teams are often filled with workers whose chief qualifications are that they have a degree, knew an HR email address, and owned an interview suit. SEAL platoons operate with philosophies and tactics that are consistent with the long-term strength of the SEAL organization. Businesses are blighted with managers who give priority to short-term spikes in the stock price rather than consistent growth, dazzle shareholders with unreasonable expectations of profitability, and cash in employee pension funds in order to pay for second homes. If any of this sounds familiar, you are not alone. Today, American managers face increasing demands for productivity, but they are using leadership tools and organizational processes designed for the 1990s, which is already a different business era. If they're really serious about their organization's survival, U.S. business managers need to get serious about rebuilding their corporate cultures. That means emphasizing real leadership and teamwork instead of waiting for their stock options to roll in. During the 1990s, several trends influenced the way American managers did business. First, at the beginning of the decade, several rounds of layoffs led to sweeping reductions in employee numbers. Leanness became the adopted theme of corporate America, often to such an extent that making cuts became a knee-jerk course of action. Frequently, corporate leanness led to a compromise in organizational effectiveness. Departments were slashed and gutted until they were so flat that the typical organization chart was only 2 levels deep. Managers were abandoned from above and swamped by input from dozens of workers just below. Second, later in the decade, the economy resumed its expansion and the demand for quality workers grew. But the supply of quality labor didn't keep up. The lone manager, swamped by his workers, now had to compete relentlessly with other companies for his workers' services. In an effort to retain their employees, harried managers dished out better titles, more pay, and greater respect. Woe to the company that risked not granting workers immediate access to upper management, or that didn't refer to them all fawningly as entrepreneurs and leaders. Hell, at this point, everyone was a leader. Everyone in the company. Somewhere along the way, either because of the excessive efforts to retain workers or because of the excessive elimination of organizational structures, managers lost their ability to lead. When they made decisions that were unpopular with the troops, they were not supported by senior management. Their lines of communication were circumvented and became ineffective as their subordinates emailed senior management directly. On top of this, the willingness of companies to lay off their employees earlier in the decade was reflected in a climate of skepticism and mistrust among those same workers. And now, after a spate of high-profile cases of corporate corruption, that mistrust has increased further. As a result, the business world has increasingly become a world of individuals. Corporate teams that once banded together to push forward are now like mercenary gangs. Corporations, terrified of offending anyone in their splintering groups, hesitate to rein in the warlords. And corporate culture has often become little more than a sea of managerial nomads, loyal to no one and motivated overwhelmingly by salary, convenience, and the size of the corporate gym. This has been a disaster for managers and leaders who want to create value and get results. It's difficult to lead workers who have been abandoned by senior management. It's tough to make unpopular choices when senior management won't back you up. It's hard to stay on course when subordinates can go around you. Enough! If you want to run a successful organization, you can't afford to work this way anymore. It's time to run your organization like a team again, and in a manner that is principally designed to produce results. The examples in this book have been chosen for their effectiveness in illustrating how to develop business teams and how to maximize their effectiveness. It's a collection of lessons from SEAL training and SEAL operations that have been tested in the business world. These are field lessons that have been used in startups and tactics that have been tried in boardrooms. This book is not intended for armchair generals, military romantics, or water-cooler commandos. It was written for managers who want to improve their leadership abilities and sharpen their team's effectiveness. It was written for managers who want to infuse a large dose of mission focus, communications efficiency, and team loyalty into their organization. It was written for managers who are willing to take those lessons that fit their particular situation and use them to win. Chapter 1. Setting Goals. In a perfect world, every mission has well-defined objectives, clear-cut guidelines to operate, and exact metrics to measure success. In reality, people charge forward without having all their ducks in a row. It's human nature. If it happens on the battlefield, it results in casualties and long, drawn-out campaigns. In the business world, it results in far-reaching concepts that never should have gotten off the ground, poor product launches, inaccurate budgeting, and business ventures that should never have been financed. The greatest enthusiasm in the world won't make up for a business plan that doesn't work. Have you ever been jerked back to reality at 3 a.m. by the harsh realization that the business plan you put in motion the previous day wasn't going to work? On one occasion, John recognized the inescapable fact that he would not be able to compete with another commando unit for a potential assault mission. At that moment, the other unit was simply located closer to an airfield with available aircraft standing by. Nothing he could do would change that. What's the only way to prevent something like this happening? Map out your mission in as much detail as possible. Not just how you'd like your mission to unfold, but what to do when your plan unravels. In his case, he quickly moved tactical aircraft to be based at his location. Do you think you're spending too much time on planning? Spend some more. Do you think you're worrying too much about things that may or may not happen? Worry more. Success in the boardroom or on the battlefield does not require everything to go perfectly. It requires you to be ready when things go wrong. You have to be able to make adjustments for the guy who breaks his leg during the parachute jump, or to work around the analyst who up and quits in the middle of the week. How do you prepare for that? By planning ahead. Set specific goals and establish identifiable paths to reach them. Duh, right? But time after time, organizations fail to do this. Every quarter, lots of smart people assume that everyone else on their team has the same game plan. It's a bad assumption. The world is littered with the bones of well-financed organizations with hard-working employees who spun their separate wheels, ran around in separate circles, jumped from project to project, and collectively had no idea of what they were doing. What follows are lessons we've learned about setting goals along the way. Take them, use them, apply them. They might save you in the end. Lesson 1. Choose a path, or take your chances. In 1991, during the Gulf War, a mid-level SEAL officer pushed forward a unique plan that had the potential to significantly affect the direction of the war. According to this plan, SEALs would infiltrate behind enemy lines and begin an assault aimed at diverting Iraqi military units from the front. Such a commando strike would involve the risk of losing commandos in the assault force. After all, any enemy units encountered during the raid would outnumber the commandos. At the same time, if the operation succeeded, the main U.S. conventional force would have fewer enemy defensive units to face during the main offensive push. During the actual operation, a small team of SEALs traveled up the enemy coastline in rubber boats and landed on the Iraqi-held beach. Once ashore, they detonated several explosive haversacks and fired their rifles inland. Despite the small size of the commando group, a large enough number of gunshots were fired and enough explosives were detonated to convince the Iraqis that they were under attack from a marine amphibious landing. Consequently, the Iraqi military leadership shifted 2 divisions away from the front in order to protect its flank. In effect, the small SEAL team, a handful of commandos, caused thousands of enemy troops to move away from their defensive positions and out of the way of oncoming American forces. The advancing conventional U.S. force thus faced thousands fewer enemy troops during its drive toward Kuwait. Why was the mission a success? Good fortune and the weather played a part, of course, as they always do. But ultimately, the mission succeeded because people had made a series of complementary, goal-oriented decisions. 3 decades earlier, someone had made the decision to create an organization that could conduct unconventional warfare. Then, a year before the mission was conducted, someone had trained a platoon in the skills needed for this type of mission. 2 months before the mission, someone had made the decision that such a mission could strategically influence the war. 24 hours before the SEALs landed on the beach, someone had made the decision to task that particular platoon with the mission. Sometime during the 24 hours before the mission was launched, probably immediately after he had been tasked with it, the platoon commander confirmed that he could successfully conduct the mission. The operation succeeded because a number of people made independent but interconnected decisions to establish, reinforce, and achieve specific objectives. In doing so, the SEAL organization repeatedly made decisions that ultimately gave the commandos an edge. This is the core of commando and unconventional operations: setting up an unfair fight where you'll have a distinct advantage over the enemy. In this case, the United States chose the target. The United States dictated the time, place, and type of assault. The United States decided what forces would be risked and what weapons and equipment would be used. At every opportunity, the SEAL organization made a decision, ahead of time, on every significant variable that would affect the commando's mission. In doing so, the SEALs chose the most advantageous conditions possible and greatly increased their chances for success. If they hadn't done this, they would have risked getting into a fair fight. Do you think this is the way things happen in the business world? That companies spend their time planning their operations and their moves well in advance? That they look for ways to avoid a fair fight? Think again. Venture capitalists use the phrase hockey stick profits. It refers to that graph that a lot of people walk in with that shows a slow growth of business, and then, wham! Exponential growth like the business end of a hockey stick. And when you talk to them, it's a sure thing. It's all indicative of one of three things. A, the person making the presentation has discovered the next Microsoft. B, the person hasn't grasped the realities of business. Or C, the person thinks everyone else in the room is an idiot. The answer most often is B, the person hasn't done the homework. The unfortunate thing is, the problem's not that the hockey stickers aren't bright people. It's not that they don't know their industry. And it's not that the technology isn't available to help them. The problem is usually that they haven't spent the time to identify and understand everything that's required if the project is to succeed, and every nightmare scenario that could arise. In addition to having a good general concept of what their product can provide and which consumers they will target, entrepreneurs need to lay down concrete goals and milestones. Why do I assume that they haven't? Because, if they had, their revenue and profit lines probably wouldn't look like hockey sticks, or their list of what-ifs would be a mile long. When SEAL platoons plan a mission, their flowcharts look like upside-down family trees. The mission starts out as a strong, solid trunk, and then quickly begins to split and branch out with every contingency. You're going to parachute into enemy territory? What happens if the inbound plane comes under fire? What happens if someone breaks a foot upon landing? What happens if you come into contact with an enemy soldier while you're moving toward your target? The splitting tree branches continue all the way to the end of the mission. What happens if your extraction helicopter doesn't show up? And these are just the contingencies that the SEAL platoon can think of. Others will come up. Lesson 2. Get specific when you define your problem. Right now, an Iranian submarine might be near the Strait of Hormuz, in a position to threaten a major commercial shipping lane. How might this problem be perceived? Is the problem that the submarine can potentially sink merchant vessels? Is the problem that the submarine intends to sink merchant vessels? What if the problem is that the oil on board the merchant vessels might not make it to the United States? What if the actual problem is that Iran has decided to demonstrate that it can threaten U.S. interests? How this problem is defined will influence whether the United States will respond, what the U.S. response should be, and who should make up the response team. Suppose the problem is that the submarine intends to sink merchant vessels. Then the specific problem might be that underwater guidance systems are about to deliver several tons of explosives within killing distance of several merchant vessels. The solution might be to thwart the underwater guidance systems, or to render the explosives useless before they reach their targets. Or suppose the problem is that the oil on board might be lost. Then the specific problem might be that the oil on board will not arrive in the United States, resulting in oil shortages. Then the solution might be to ensure additional or alternative petroleum delivery systems. Or suppose the real problem is that another country, in this case Iran, feels confident enough to threaten U.S. interests. Then the specific problem might be that the country feels that it is immune to U.S. reprisals. In that case, the solution might be to demonstrate that threatening the United States has severe consequences. How the problem is defined determines whether SEALs will ever be involved. If the problem is that the submarine is about to sink friendly ships, then SEALs are a dependable option that senior leaders will consider. The appropriate SEAL team would place one of its platoons on alert and begin planning a direct action mission. Launch vessels or submarines would be coordinated to insert and extract the team. On the other hand, if the problem amounts to possible oil shortages in the United States, it would be outside the scope of the SEAL organization to solve. SEALs couldn't ensure that domestic coal production would increase to make up the difference, or that Alaskan pipeline capacity would double. The SEAL platoon's phone wouldn't ring. The team members' beepers wouldn't go off. Lesson 3. Plan ahead. Prepare for a new situation that has not yet been identified. Following September 11th, my boss in my new civilian job asked if there was any chance that I would be called back into the Navy. I said, not a chance. I considered myself too old and with too many miles. A couple of weeks later, I received a phone call, walked into my boss's office, and said, "Tomorrow's my last day of work. I might not be back for a year." I drove to San Diego, planning to run training or logistics from a stateside base for the next 6 months. The next day, I was told I would soon be moving forward to a cold-weather climate. A few days later, everything changed, and I was flown out to the aircraft carrier USS Stennis for emergency transit to the Middle East. Upon arriving at the Gulf of Oman, I went ashore for a brief sight survey. "I'll be back in 3 days," I told the carrier battle group commander. Another commando met me on shore and told me that I would not be returning to the ship, but would instead be taking command of a small forward-based unit. A 4-month mission followed suddenly by a 3-month mission somewhere else far away. The SEAL organization cannot predict what specific battles will be fought in the future, but it does prepare so that SEALs will continue to have the edge no matter what those battles are. To do so, the SEAL organization goes beyond training its corpsmen to treat future gunshot wounds and training its divers to sink terrorist ships that haven't yet been identified. It continually positions itself so that it can quickly react to future situations. To accomplish this, the SEAL organization embraces several principles of change that are likely to define the future battlefield. They include the anticipation of continued chaos. The SEAL organization assumes that the geopolitical trends of the last few decades will continue, resulting in fewer defined wars and more shadowy conflicts. Instead of going up against major powers on the battlefield, SEALs will be more likely to confront asymmetric enemies who hide in the bushes, dark city alleys, and upscale suburban neighborhoods. Unable to fight head-on against the United States, such enemies will increasingly take advantage of mobile phones for communications, credit cards and money machines for finance, and dorm rooms and the homes of friends for safe havens. Accordingly, the SEAL organization continues to emphasize indirect, unconventional, and clandestine warfare. The anticipation of continued technological advancement. Technological advancement will continue to change the definition of the battlefield. Enemies will continue to obtain cutting-edge communications, logistics, and intelligence capabilities, as well as new and increasingly lethal weapons, including weapons of mass destruction. They will acquire techniques for corrupting information and computer networks. They will become more proficient at sabotaging commercial production and causing environmental disasters. As a result, the SEAL organization maintains advanced technological capabilities at the platoon level in terms of both equipment and training. Furthermore, the SEAL organization maintains an aggressive equipment and tactics development process that continually updates standard operating procedures, produces major new SEAL platforms, and extends training into new and diverse areas. The anticipation that something totally unforeseen will occur.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?